Good evening. This is lesson 7-7 on simple and compound interest. In tonight's lesson, you're going to be able to solve simple interest problems, and you're also going to be able to solve compound interest problems. So we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, we're going to skip the warm-up and go right to what it means when we talk about simple interest. When we put money in the bank in a savings account, usually we have to decide, do we want a simple interest or compound interest? And there's some terms that they use here. They use a principal. This is the amount of money you put in the bank. This is your deposit, whether you're putting in $100 right away, maybe $2,000, whatever money you're putting in to start it, that's your principal. Interest is the money you earn for borrowing this money to the bank. So you earn interest on the saved money. The interest rate is the percent rate the bank is offering. So they might say, well, we'll give you 3% every year off your principal of what you put in. And then simple interest is only interest paid on the principal. So every single year, if you had a simple interest, if it was 3%, every year they give you 3% of that money you first put in. And that's what we're talking about. To find the simple interest, we use this formula. I is equal to P times R times T. I is the interest, so how much money you earn. And P is the principal again. Rate is that interest rate, which we switch to a decimal when we multiply these out. And T is the time in years. I'm going to underline that because that's going to come in handy in these next couple problems. So interest is equal to principal times rate times time. So we're going to use this now. Suppose you deposit $1,000 in a saving account that earns 6% simple interest per year. A says find this interest earned in 2 years. And then it says find the total amount of money you have in the bank then. So again, we're going to use this. Interest is equal to principal times rate times time. Well, we don't know what the interest is yet, so we're going to leave it as I. Principal, well, you put in $1,000. Our interest rate is 6%, but again, we can divide that by 100 to get it a decimal, so 600ths, and our time is 2 years. So if you multiply these out, 1,000 times 600ths times 2, we find out that you earn interest of $120. So that's how much money or free money you basically get for borrowing this money to the bank. So we found the interest, now we have to find the total. So if you had $1,000 in the bank and you got $120 in interest, you now have $1,120 in the bank. Done. So now B says find the interest earned in 6 months. So we're switching this problem. Like this time, instead of 2 years, I want to know how much money would I earn for keeping my money in the bank for 6 months. So same idea. We don't know what the interest is yet, so it stays as I. My principal is still $1,000. My rate is still 600ths or 6%. Now my time. If you remember, I just underlined something on the previous page where I talk about T is a time in years. So when we use this T, we can't put in the number 6 because then it's taken as if it's 6 months, or 6 years instead of 6 months. So we need to go ahead and think of this as 6 over 12 because there are 6 months in a year. So this is what you'd have. So you'd have 6/12 or 1/2. If you simplify it, which I probably should simplify it to 1/2. But again, that comes from that 6 out of 12 months. So 6 divided by 12 is 1/2 or 5/10. And now I multiply it. 1,000 times 600ths times 1/2 is $30. So you earn interest of $30 in 6 months. And of course, we still have to find your actual balance. So you take your principal, $1,000, plus how much money you actually earned, and this is your balance at the bank, $1,030. There we go. So here's 2 more that I want you to do all on your own, and when you're all done, come back and check your answer. So go ahead and pause me now. All right, let's go ahead and check those. So again, if I were to do this, interest is equal to principal times rate times time. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Since you already did the work, you multiply those all out and you find that the interest, so 250 times 4 hundredths times 3 is $30. And here you didn't actually have to find the balance because they just wanted to know what the interest was. So this A, you should have had $30. Now B, we do the same idea. My principal is still 250. My percentage rate is 35 thousandths. And my time is again 6/12 or 1/2 because it's only 6 months. And you end up getting an interest of $4 and 375 thousandths of a cent. Well, when we talk about money, we never write it in the thousands. We always write it in the hundredths. So I'm going to go ahead and round that to $4.38 because again, the number after it's a 5, so I round up. So my interest here is $4.38. So that's simple interest. Another thing they might offer you is compound interest. This is when a bank pays interest on the principal that you first put in, but then after that they also pay interest on the money you already have in your bank. So for example, you have your money in the bank for a year and you earn so much interest. Well, next time they're going to pay interest based off that money from that original principal plus that interest you already earned. All right, so when we talk about the balance, that's the principal plus the interest that's in the account. And to do this one, to find out your actual balance, you use this equation, which is a little more, well, complicated, or looks a little more complex, but it's really not that bad. B is the final balance, so how much money you have in the end, and that is equal to the principal times 1 plus the interest rate, again in a decimal, and to the nth power. And nth is the number of interest periods. So again, it's kind of considered the time in a way. All right, so let's go ahead and, so you can use that one, or else there's this whole idea of you can do a table of it. So you deposit $400 in an account that earns 5% annually. The balance after the first 4 years is $486.20. What is the balance in your account after another 4 years for a total of 8? Round to the nearest cent. Well, I'm just not actually going to solve this whole thing, but I'm going to show you how it works. So again, they say after 4 years, this is what I have in my account. Right? And I earn a 5% interest rate. So I take my principal, 486 and 20 cents, times that 5% or 500ths, and I find out that I earned $24.31 in interest that year. So then I add that to my original balance, 486.20, and my balance at the end of year 5 is $510.51. So now that's my starting balance, $510.51. But again, now that gets times by my interest rate of 5%, and I end up making $25.53. So then I add that onto my original balance of $510.51. And I find out at the end of year 6, I have $536.04. So that's my new balance. You can see how this works. All right, so each time my interest rate or my balance is what I get interest on from now on. So that's one way you could do it. You can make a table. Another way to do it is to use that formula that I just gave you. The B is equal to P times 1 plus 1 R over N. So here, find the balance on a deposit for $2,500 that earns 3% interest compounded semi-annually for 4 years. Okay, this one can be a little bit tricky because it's not talking about once a year anymore. This is done semi-annually, meaning that it is done twice a year. So when we talk about interest, like time and interest and those sort of things, what you end up doing is you have to divide the interest rate. So I get paid 3% interest for the whole year. But if I do this twice a year, they're not going to give me a 3% each time because that would total 6%. It's 3% for the whole year. So I have to divide that by 2. So my new interest rate is 1.5% per period. And then I do this semi-annually for 4 years, meaning if I do it 2 times a year for 4 years, that's going to be 8 times. They do this 8 times in those 4 years. So now I have this information and I can solve it. B is equal to my principal, which is $2,500, times 1 plus, well, my interest rate is 1.5%, but again, I want that switched to a fraction, so it's really 1/1500th. And then to the, well, 8th time, to the 8th power, because again, we do this 8 different times. So I can go ahead and solve it. First, I have to add those together and then do to the 8th power. So 1 and 1/1500ths, or excuse me, 15 thousandths to the 8th power, and then times that by 2,500, and I find out my balance at the end of this time is $2,816.23. And again, I did that by first doing this to the 8th power and then timesing it by 2,500. All right, so we're going to practice this a little bit more. Find the balance for each account when they give you this information. Amount deposited is $900. The annual rate is 2%, and the time is 3 years. Well, in A, it's just compounded annually, meaning once a year. So we go ahead and just write down that one they give us, so this is the formula. Now, we don't have to divide by 2 or times the year by 2 this time, because it's only done once a year. So this time you don't have to change anything, you just plot it right in here. So I deposited $900. My interest rate is 2%, which is really 200ths. And then I do this for 3 years. So again, you plop it into your calculator once I simplify this. 900 times 1 and 200ths to the 3rd power. And I didn't really simplify that one. There we go. Now I have it. All right, so then I go ahead and start doing this. 1 and 200ths to the 3rd power. Times that answer right away by 900, and I find out my balance is equal to $955.09. All right, and final one, this time it's compounded semi-annually, so that means twice a year again. So first things first, I need to change my percentage rate by dividing it by 2, so it's actually 1% every single time it's done a year. And then my time, well, if we do it twice a year for 3 years, that means they do it for 6 different times. So 6 times is now N, and this is now R. So now I can go ahead and plop everything in. So it's still $900 that was deposited. Here, my interest rate is 1%, but to a decimal, that's 100th, and it's to the 6th power. 900 times 1 and 100ths to the 6th power. Well, I go ahead and plot that in to my calculator and times it by 900 right away. And I get the money in my account is $955.37. So you can see how, well, even though we had the same idea, how it makes a difference if you compound it annually or if it's done 2 times a year in comparison. They made a little bit more money doing semi-annually. All right, that's your lesson for tonight. Tonight we talked about how to find the simple interest by doing P is equal to the principal times rate times time, or the compound one. I will see you in class tomorrow. Have a good night.